مساء النور. سوف نبدأ بعد قليل.
Dr. Wafa, let's test the microphone and the camera. They are now, they appears on your account. The camera is good. Let's see the microphone. Okay, it's open also.
All right.
Okay, great. We will start in 1 minute.
All right.
مساء سعيد على الجميع. يسعدنا في هذه الأمسية أن نقدم لكم في إطار أنشطة المركز الديمقراطي العربي وبتعاون مع المركز المتوسطي للدراسات والأبحاث الدولية والتشاركية التابع لجامعة محمد الخامس بالمغرب، وأيضا بتعاون مع معهد تنمية الموارد البشرية التابع للأكاديمية الليبية بليبيا، ورشة تدريبية بعنوان ICP أرجو أن يتم إغلاق الميكروفونات لأن في المرة المقبلة سوف يتم استبعاد أي مشارك يفتح ميكروفونه بدون سبب، وشكرا. كنت أقول أن الورشة التدريبية لهذا المساء هي ورشة باللغة الإنجليزية معنونة ب ICP Teaching Between Theory and Practice A Case Study. هذه الورشة الهامة هي من تأطير الدكتورة وفاء ورنيكي من جامعة جلفة بالجزائر. دكتور وفاء، مساء الخير.
Good evening. مساء النور أستاذ كريم.
أتمنى أن تكون الأجواء بخير عندكم وأن تكونوا في صحة جيدة وعلى استعداد لتأطير هذه الدورة.
Yes, okay. Thank you very much. Well, good
ولكن
evening
قبل أن
everyone.
تبتدئي دكتورة عفوا لابد أن أقدمك للمشاركين الذين يتابعوننا عبر الزوم أو يتابعوننا عبر الصفحة الرسمية للمركز الديمقراطي العربي. لدقائق أقدمك دكتورة، فأنت من الجزائر كما أسلفنا الذكر، من جامعة الجلفة. أحرزت على شهادة الماستر في اللغة الإنجليزية بعلوم اللغة الإنجليزية في سنة 2012 بجامعة بسكرة بالجزائر، والدكتوراه سنة 2019 في ديداكتيك التخصص الإنجليزي بجامعة وهران بالجزائر. أنت أستاذة مساعدة في ديداكتيك التعليم بجامعة زيان عاشور بجلفة الجزائر. لك تجربة غنية جدا حول التجربة التدريسية أولا، وذلك في جامعتك في جامعة ميديا هاي سكول المسماة بالخوارزمي لمدة 9 سنوات، ودرستم بجامعة المدية كما تقولون اللغة الإنجليزية العامة، وبها يعني درستم أيضا الإنجليزية كلغة حاسوب. ثم بجامعة بسكرة في 2017 بدأتم تدريس ديداكتيك التعليم، ديداكتيك تدريس اللغة الإنجليزية، والتي أنتم بها الآن كأستاذ محاضر لديداكتيك تعليم اللغة الإنجليزية بجامعة زيان عاشور جلفة. لكم بطبيعة الحال العديد من المشاركات في العديد من المؤتمرات. المؤتمر الوطني الأول في تبسة حول موضوع هل هيلاري كلينتون سوف تتراجع أو تنهزم في مسألة إبراز دور المرأة في السياسة. Will Hillary Clinton defeat sit back women in politics. وكان لكم أيضا مشاركة في مؤتمر Study Day Department of Psychology التابع لجامعة وهران حول موضوع استعمال التبغ بالنسبة لصحة المرأة Tobacco Use and Women's Health. وأيضا في المؤتمر الأول، وبطبيعة الحال أرى أمامي لائحة طويلة من المشاركات الهامة والقيمة في مؤتمرات عديدة. ويضاف إلى هذه المشاركات مجموعة من المقالات العلمية التي نشرتم على مجلات متعددة، وكنتم أيضا مراجعين ومصححين للعديد من المجلات. Reviewer in Journal of Afro-Asian Studies بألمانيا، و Journal of Research and Innovation in Language بإندونيسيا. مجلة أخرى وهي Journal of Communication and Cultural Trends in Pakistan، ومجلة Comparative Legal Studies بشلف الجزائر، وأيضا مجلة المحترف جلفة الجزائر، مجلة أفق للعلوم أيضا بجلفة الجزائر. دكتورة وفاء، هذا تقديم بالرغم من طوله فهو مقتضب لما أسهمتم به في الساحة العلمية والأكاديمية، ويسعدنا في إطار هذا النشاط أن نسطر إلى ضرورة الانتباه إلى ما ستقدمه الدكتورة في ورشتها والاستماع وعدم تفعيل الميكروفون والتركيز. وسنقدم رابط تسجيل الحضور عند اقتراب نهاية الورشة التدريبية كي تتمكنون من الحصول على شهاداتكم المستحقة. دكتور وفاء, it's a big pleasure to have you tonight in the Arabic Democratic Center. I think I took too much time to present the workshop, and the floor is yours now. Please welcome.
Thank you very much, Dr. Aish. Good evening, everyone. Well, first of all, let me thank the Democratic Arabic Center for all the efforts that has been doing for all researchers, PhD holders, and even students. I like to, oh, can you hear me, please? Can you hear me?
Yes,
okay.
Yes.
Thank you. So Dr. Aish for also all his efforts and help. Well, let me thank you very much for introducing me and talking about my CV. Well, I would like just to repeat one thing because I would like to explain the title of my workshop. Well, I am keen on ESP. This is briefly to say. Well, so I am a PhD holder in didactics of teaching ESP. And I focus on this. Why I'm saying didactics of teaching ESP. First, I know that all of you know what's meant by ESP. It's the abbreviation form of English for specific purposes. Now, why I precise on the didactics of teaching ESP? Because it's related to the title that I'd like to provide for my workshop, which is ESP teaching between theory and practice. Why I have said this, why I'm talking about ESP in theory and practice, because what we learn about ESP in theory is something, and the actual practice is absolutely something else. That's why I emphasized on the didactics of teaching ESP. In other words, we need to be aware about how ESP should be taught so that we can be called ESP practitioners. Otherwise, we may teach ESP, but in fact, what we are doing is teaching general English instead. So let me provide you with a plan of our work. First of all, of our workshop, sorry. First of all, I'd like to provide some brief definitions of ESP. Then we move on to differentiate also briefly ESP and EGP, the difference between English for general purposes and English for specific purposes. Then we will have to talk about some issues in teaching ESP, and we are going to focus on grammar in ESP and vocabulary in ESP, types of content in ESP, real content, career content, and of course, we are going to talk about the different roles of the ESP teacher. After that, we'll move forward when we have a general idea about the definitions, those issues of grammar, vocabulary, how they should be taught in ESP. I'm going to present the case study that I have conducted personally in the Department of Computing in order to see whether what we have learned in theory is put in reality, in practice, when ESP is taught in other departments. Of course, I'm talking about teaching of ESP in different departments and not about teaching ESP or the didactics of teaching ESP at the Department of English. So let's proceed with the different definitions of ESP. As we know that ESP has been defined by different scholars. First of all, we have Mackay and Montfort, who attempted to define in ESP in terms of what it should and shouldn't be. So as we have stated, there are almost as many definitions of ESP as the number of scholars who have attempted to define it. Many have attempted to define it in terms of what it should and shouldn't be, but we would rather concentrate on finding out what ESP really means. First, Mackay and Montfort in 1978 defined ESP as the teaching of English for a clearly utilitarian purpose. The purpose they refer to is defined by the needs of the learners, which can be academic, occupational, or scientific. These needs, in turn, determine the content of the ESP curriculum to be taught and learned. So what do we mean by this definition? When Mackay and Montfort stated that ESP is the teaching of English for clearly utilitarian purpose, means that there is a purpose in which English is taught for. And this purpose can be either academic, because ESP is divided into EAP, and ELP. EAP, it's English for academic purposes, means English for academic computing at university level, English for medicine at university level. This is what we mean by academic purposes. Means that those students are adult learners, but who are studying the English language as a subject or as a module at university level. And we have another type of ESP, which is ELP, English for occupational purposes. Here, after the student finishes his studies and moves on to his career, so he becomes a doctor, an engineer, etc., then he needs English to fulfill a particular task. For instance, a doctor may need English for for example, to present conferences abroad. So he needs to promote the development of his speaking skill. This is what we mean by English for academic or occupational, but according to Mackay and Montford. So also Montford also defined ESP in the special language that takes place in specific setting by certain participants. They stated that those participants are usually adults. Of course, when we talk about EGP, here we may talk about children, we may talk about, students of middle school, high school, etc. But when we talk about ESP, here we are talking about adults. We are talking either about EAP, university students, they are supposed to be adults, or even for those who have already finished their career, if we talk about English for occupational purposes. So bear it in mind that whenever we talk about ESP, the type of learners are adults, usually adults. So, and they focused on adults because adults are usually highly conscious of the reasons to attain English proficiency in determined field of specialization. Why they have focused on adults? Because the adult already knows, he's conscious about his need, he's aware about his needs, and he knows why he needs English or what he needs English for. As Hutchinson and Waters state, tell me what you need English for and I tell you the English that you need. However, do we ask our learners in middle or high school about their English needs? No, we do not ask them. It's the teachers who is better aware about the needs of his learners. However, it's not the case of the ESP course. Now, we have said highly conscious of the reasons to attain English proficiency in determined field of specialization, and because adults make real use of special language in the special setting they work. The second one who defined ESP is Hutchinson and Waters. They are very famous and they have got the book of English for specific purposes. They defined ESP in 1987. They consider ESP as an approach rather than product and say that the base of ESP is the question, why does this learner need to learn a foreign language? In relation to this, Dudley Evans and S.T. Jones state, the answer to the question relates to the learners, the language required, and the learning context, and thus establishes the primacy of needs in ESP. So, according to Hutchinson and Waters, ESP is defined ESP as an approach rather than a product. Okay, what do they mean? They say they defined, they answered the question that ESP has to do with the learners, the language required. What do we mean by the language required? It means the type of the language they need, and the learning context. What do we mean by the learning context? Means the field of specialization they are interested in, and this, or therefore, establishes the primacy of needs. Of course, I'm going to talk about needs later on, but I cannot deny it. And all the definitions agree on the premise of ESP, of needs analysis, as the core of ESP teaching. We cannot start any ESP teaching before conducting needs analysis, because it's supposed to be, ESP is defined as needs-based. Means needs-based. These needs are based on, this curriculum or this course is based on the learner's needs. The third one who have attempted to define ESP was Strivens. Strivens is very famous in 1977, he attempted to define ESP in terms of absolute and variable characteristics. And later on, the definition of Strivens has been revised and is the one which is currently given. Whenever we talk about the definition of ESP, we talk about the definition of a Strivens, but the revised one, which has been defined by someone else that we're going to talk about later. So Strivens has attempted to define ESP in terms of absolute and variable characteristics. According to him, the absolute characteristics of ESP is that ESP comprises English language teaching, which is designed to meet specific needs of the learner. Number one, the absolute characteristic, it meets the specific needs of the learner. As I have just said, that ESP is based on the needs of the learner. So if we intend to teach ESP, it should be based on the needs of our learners. We need to fulfill, we need to cater, we need to satisfy the needs of our learners. So it should be needs-based or course-based needs. Number two, the second characteristic, absolute characteristic, is that it is related in content. It means in its themes and topic to specific disciplines, of course. So they say that the themes or the topics should be related to the student's field of specialization. Well, I am teaching English for medicine. The topic and the themes should be related to the field of medicine. I'm not supposed to teach them, for instance, or the material should be brought from the field of engineering students. Of course, the topics and the themes should be related to the student's field of discipline or field of specialism. Okay, this is the second absolute characteristic in the definition of Strivens. The third point is that a specific discipline, occupation, activities centered on language appropriate to those activities in syntax, lexis, discourse, semantics, and so on. Of course, when we teach ESP, all the grammatical points, all the vocabulary that we intend to teach should have a direct relation with the material that we bring. In other words, for instance, if I intend to teach any course, any grammar course, I bring a material that is related to the student's field of study, then I should check what is well exemplified in this text, then select it as a point, as a grammatical point to be taught. Means that if we select a material, it should, even the grammatical points or the linguistic patterns that we intend to teach should have to do or to deal with that particular text. The third point that he has mentioned, that ESP is in contrast with general English. And here we put a big question mark, and remember later on when we discuss that the question that we are going to revise later on in the other definition. He said that one of the absolute characteristics of ESP is that it is in contrast with general English. Means they have nothing to do with each other. They are in opposition. And I'm going later on to explain this point. So in contrast with general English. On the other hand, the variable characteristics of ESP in the scholar's view, he said that it may be restricted to the learning skills to be learned, for example, reading only. In the variable characteristic, he stated that sometimes we need to focus only on one particular skill rather on 2 or 3, and here it's okay. And number 2 may not be taught according to any preordinate methodology, means that each ESP practitioner has got or should adapt his or her own methodology in teaching. This is the third definition. So we have Mackey and Mortred, they defined ESP as the teaching of English for clarity-to purpose. And number 2, Hutchinson and Waters, they defined ESP as an approach rather than a product. And Strivens, he defined ESP in terms of absolute and variable characteristics. And one of the absolute characteristics of Strivens' definition is that it is in contrast with general English. Remember this, later on we are going to revise it. And the fourth one is Robinson. Robinson defined accepting the primacy of needs analysis in 1990, defines ESP based on two key defining criteria and the number of characteristics generally found to be true ESP. The 2 criteria, she says, that refer to the fact that ESP is normally goal-oriented and ESP courses are produced based on needs analysis. Look, whenever we define ESP according to any scholar, the point they agreed on is that ESP is goal-oriented and it's based on the needs of the learners, or the first point or the core of ESP is needs analysis. So whenever you hear the term ESP, bear in mind needs analysis, learner-centered approach. So this is according to Robinson. Of course, there are different definitions of ESP. However, we will move on directly. We will not spend much time in defining ESP. We will move on directly to the definition of ESP by Dudley Evans and S.T. Jones. What did Dudley Evans and S.T. Jones do? In 1998, they revised the definition of Strevens because they considered it to be the most comprehensive definition. However, as I have stated, they have revised it. They have omitted something, they have added something, and they have revised some weaknesses in the definition of Strevens. The main weakness in the definition of the Strevens in the absolute characteristics, is that ESP is in contrast with general English. ESP is not in contrast with general English. We, as EFL teachers, we intend to go to different departments in order to teach ESP. So I am an EFL teacher. What am I supposed to teach? Am I supposed to teach this specialty? I am a language teacher. I intend to teach the language. So I intend, it is not, so ESP, it is not in contrast with general English. We need to have a general background of general English in order to learn it for specific purposes. So this is the weakness, the main weakness of the definition of Strevens that has been revised by Dudley Evans and S.T. Jones. So S.T. Jones, sorry. So the definitions of Dudley Evans and S.T. Jones is the one that is, widely used. Whenever you ask someone to define ESP for you, they defined according to Dudley Evans and S.T. Jones in 1998. They attempted to define ESP in terms of absolute and variable characteristics. According to them, the absolute characteristics of ESP are: ESP is designed to meet specific needs of the learner. This is as the one of Strevens. Of course, ESP is supposed to meet the needs of our learners. ESP makes use of the underlying methodology and activities of the discipline it serves. And ESP is centered on the language, grammar, lexis, and register skills discourse appropriate to these activities. As we have already explained, that the grammar, the vocabulary, whatever, should be related to in topics and themes to the field of the students or field of specialism. However, for the as you can notice that here they have omitted in contrast with general English, because ESP is not in contrast with general English. I am insisting on this point. The variable characteristics according to Dudley Evans and S.T. Jones is that ESP may be related or designed for specific disciplines. ESP may use in specific teaching situations a different methodology, means the nature of interaction between the teacher and the learner from that of general English. Why they say that a different methodology, I'm going to explain what they mean, that the ESP teacher may use a different methodology from that of general English. It's true. Usually in EGP classes, it's the teacher. It's even if we say that nowadays it's all learner-centered, but it's the teacher who plays the role of the controller, of the guide, as if he does everything. However, it is not the case of ESP. Here they say that they may use a different methodology, means that they may collaborate. The relationship between the teacher and the learner in an ESP context differs from that of EGP, because here they play the role of collaborator. Sometimes the teacher attempts to collaborate with his learners. Why? Because the learners are specialists in the field, and the teacher, is a language teacher, means that he needs to know some information, some piece of information from the learners, as the learners are the primary knowers of their subject matter. So the teacher may even learn from his learners. Okay. Now we move on. ESP is likely to be designed for adult learners, either at terrestrial level, or institutions. So they have said that usually ESP is meant to be for adult learners. And this, according to the different definitions that we have just explained, that ESP intends to be for adult learners. But sometimes it can be for other, we say usually for adult learners. Why usually? Here means that there are some exceptions, and it's true. It can be even ESP, it can be taught in high school, but it is not declared. It is not declared. I mean, if you have been teaching in high schools, you have got the textbook. If we teach scientific streams, you may find a unit of astronomy. And this is a kind of ESP. For economy, the field of economy, or students of economy and management, they have also a unit that has to do with their field of specialism. Okay, that's why they say it's usually for adult learners, but as I stated, that it may be for high school learners. So ESP is generally designed for intermediate or advanced students. Here the level differs. Most ESP courses assume basic knowledge of the language system, but it can be used also with beginners, because as I have said, we need to have a general background in general English in order to learn English for specific purposes. Okay, so briefly, we have attempted to talk about the different definitions of ESP that has been defined by Mackay and Montfort in 1978 as teaching of English for clearly tutorial purpose. The purpose they refer to can be for academic, occupational, or scientific purposes. The definition of Hutchinson and Waters in 1987, they defined ESP as a product, as an approach rather than product. And they answer that the question of teaching ESP has to do with the language required to be learned, the learners, and the context. And the learning context, by the learning context, we mean the field of specialism related to the student domain. The third definition has been, or ESP has been defined by Strevens in 1977, who attempted to define ESP in terms of absolute and variable characteristics. The main 2 points that he has discussed, that ESP is designed to meet the specific needs of the learners, and that ESP, the topics and the themes of ESP should be related to the students' themes. And the third point is that ESP is in contrast with general English. And we have stated here, please put a red line on it, that ESP is not in contrast with general English. For his variable characteristic, he said that sometimes we may focus only on one skill, for example, reading only, and ESP is not taught according to any preordinate methodology, means there isn't a particular methodology to be followed. Each teacher sorry, has a particular methodology to be adopted with his learners. Okay, so this is a brief definition. Here I have attempted to provide you with a brief definitions of ESP. Later on, if you have got any kind of questions, we will discuss in details. Now, we are going to conclude based on the definition of Dudley, Evans, and S.T. Jones, who have attempted to define ESP in terms of absolute and variable characteristics. They have revised the main point of that ESP is in contrast with general English. Starting from this point, starting from this conclusion, we are going to have the second point that we are going to discuss is the difference between ESP and EGP. Of course, ESP is English for specific purposes, and EGP, it's English for general purposes. Now, what is the difference? Is there any particular differences? Are they separated? When we talk about ESP, is it something and EGP is something else? Are they interrelated? Do we have, or can we teach ESP without having any background in general English? So this is what we are going to discuss now. So according to Orr, he attempted to define, EGP as what? Just a second. According to Orr, English for specific purposes is research and instruction that builds on EGP. Please listen carefully. English for specific purposes, according to Orr, is research and instruction that is built on EGP and is designed to prepare students or working adults for the English used in specific disciplines, vocations, or professions to accomplish specific purposes. Well, what I have appreciated much in such a quotation or in such a definition or in such a distinction between ESP and EGP that has been provided by OR is that he has summarized the relationship between ESP and EGP. He stated that ESP is research and instruction that is built on EGP. What is meant by built on EGP means that we need to have a general background in ESP in order to learn, in EGP in order to learn ESP. That's it. In other words, that we need to know English and we need to know more about English. What do we mean by more about English? Here means has to do with a specific field or discipline, but we need to master English. We need to understand English. We need to have a general background in English so that we can learn English for specific purposes, for a specific field or domain. So, the difference we can here make, I have attempted to summarize it in terms of table, the difference between EGP and ESP. In EGP, the focus on education. We need to speak English. We need to learn all the grammatical points or vocabulary related to English, etc. However, in ESP, the focus on training. What do we mean by training? By training, we need to train, we need to choose a particular skill or two particular skills and to promote the training, to promote them, to develop them, to provide the training for those two skills. For instance, I am a doctor. I need to promote the development of speaking skills so that I'll be able to present my conferences in England or whatever. So which skill needs to be improved is the speaking skill. So we are working on training a particular skill. Unlike in EGP, the focus is on education, on learning a particular language, the mastery of the language. Okay, so in EGP, as the future needs of the students are impossible to predict, course content is more difficult to select. However, in English, as the English is intended to be used in specific vocational contexts, selection of appropriate content is easier, but not easy in itself. Well, I'm going to explain this. This is selection of content in ESP is easier than EGP, but not easy in itself. What do we mean by this? By this means that selection of content, say, okay, I'm going to teach English for computing studies. Well, I'm going to choose to type on the net any text related to computing science. Here they say that the selection of content is easier than that of EGP, but not easy in itself. Why not easy in itself? I'm going to explain this point. Because when we select content, we shouldn't just have that content should have a direct relation with the student's field of specialism. But in addition to this, we need to check what is well exemplified. What are the points? Because this is supposed to use just as a content. I'm not supposed to teach computing for computing science students. I am supposed to teach the language through the content or the field or the discipline of learners. Again, I say it again, in ESP, the students are the primary knowers of their subject matter, and the teacher also plays the role of a learner in such a context. Okay, so I'm going to summarize when it comes to ESP and EGP in practice. I have attempted to summarize some 4 main points about the distinction or the difference between ESP and EGP. Of course, when we are talking about ESP and EGP classes. Number 1, in ESP, what differentiates ESP from EGP is learners and purpose of learning. This is number 1, learners and purpose of learning. ESP learners are usually adults who already have some familiarity with the English language, and they are learning the language in order to communicate a set of professional skills and to perform a job, particular related function. In EGP classes, age of learners varies from children to adults, and learning English is the subject of classes. So the main distinction, first, we said in between ESP and EGP, is that the age of the learners and purpose of learning. Age of learners, we have already discussed that in different definitions of ESP, that the age of learners, they are supposed to be adults. However, in EGP, they varies from children to adults. The purpose of learning, we have said number one, the age. Number two, purpose of learning. Purpose of learning here in ESP classes, it differs according to the field, according to the purpose of learning. For example, as I stated before, that someone wants to work in a business company, so he needs to improve his writing skill, okay? So this is the purpose of learning. However, in ESP, the learner is already familiar with the English language, means he has a general background in English and wants to learn even more within his field of specialism, okay? Now, the second point that differentiates between ESP and EGP, based on the purpose of learning, aims of instructions are identified, means that the activities, the objectives are identified according to the needs of the learners. In an EGP class, as a general rule, the 4 skills are stressed equally. What do we mean by the 4 skills? The 4 skills are speaking, listening, reading, and writing. In EGP, at university, or even in high school, or whatever, when we talk about EGP, we stress the 4 skills equally. For instance, 1 session for reading, 1 for writing, 1 for speaking, and 1 for listening. However, in ESP, it's needs analysis that determines which particular skill requires more focus. As I have stated before, a tourist guide wants to learn English. Which skill does he need more focus, or should he promote? Of course, a tourist guide is supposed to promote the speaking skill, so more focus is supposed to be put on the teaching of speaking skill. For instance, we can provide 4 sessions for speaking, 1 for writing, 1 for reading. Of course, when I say that in EGP, the 4 skills are stressed equally, means that they devote equal sessions for each skill. However, in ESP, it's needs analysis that determines. It doesn't mean that we are supposed to ignore the other skills, which are reading, listening, and even writing. But more focus, more attention, more sessions are devoted to the development or the training of one skill rather than the other. This is the second point. So the second distinction between ESP and EGP. So in EGP, the 4 skills are stressed equally. However, in ESP, it needs analysis that determines which skill it requires more focus or more training. So, and the syllabus is designed accordingly. Of course, when we conduct needs analysis, when we know about the needs of our learners, when we know about their deficiencies, what they lack, what they need to train, based on this, we design the syllabus of our learners. For example, in order to train a tourist guide for the ESP class, should promote the development of spoken skill. Another example, one who intends to work in a business administration should be trained in development of reading skills. Number 3, in a typical EGP class, there is concentration on teaching grammar and language structures, usually in isolation, but in ESP, the focus is on context. To ESP, English is not taught as a subject separated from the student's real word or wishes. In ESP, we have to teach our learners based on their needs, wishes, etc. However, in EGP, we focus more on teaching grammar, on teaching different structures, and usually in isolation. However, in ESP, the context or the field or the discipline plays a huge role, a significant role in teaching ESP. Number 4, combination of subject matter with English language creates a meaningful context, which is highly motivating. Why the context is important? Why the context is important in teaching ESP? Because we are supposed to use this context in order to teach the language. When the student, when you give him a text, and this text is about Java, I'm talking about students for computing, for instance, the students feel motivated as soon as he's going to read about Java, even if his level in English is low. But as soon as he's going to read about Java, he's going to feel motivated. Why? Because he already have some information about the field of specialism. He is specialized in computing. But my purpose as a teacher is not to teach the field, is not to teach him about Java or what is Java, etc. I'm just going to use this in order to teach a particular point. And I'm going to go to explain this more in details later. Is it okay? So I said that we're supposed to use just the context in order to teach a particular point. All right. So they say this combination of the subject matter and the language create a highly motivating environment for the learners to learn. Means, as I said, when he finds that the text has to do with his field of specialism, he's going to feel that he's involved, that he has something to say with the teacher. He is supposed to collaborate with the teacher. But if you just bring him sentences, just sentences about general English, or she prepares the cake, do you think that the students is supposed to be attracted? But if you bring something that is related to the student's field of specialism, he's going to feel attracted, even if your intention is to teach the present simple. But teaching present simple should go through his subject matter, because he needs to see such items functioning in an authentic context. So these are the main differences between ESP and EGP. And again, I focus on the point that ESP has never been in contrast with general English. Rather, the student, or if we are talking about EAP situation, or the learners, ESP learner in general, if we talk about EAP situation, need to have a general background in general English, or should be familiar with general English in order to learn more English. When I say more English here, I mean the English related to his field of specialism. All right. Now we are done with the difference between ESP and EGP. So we had a brief overview about the different definition of ESP. Then we have stated the most distinctions between ESP and EGP. Now we'll move on also to discuss, here we are still talking about theory. Later we will move on to the case study, to the practice through the PowerPoint presentation. So now we move on to language issues in ESP, and we are going to discuss grammar in ESP, vocabulary in ESP, and types of content in ESP, which are real content, and career content. What do we mean by language issues in ESP? Well, the misconception about the majority when they hear the word ESP, especially for those who belong to the classical system here in Algeria, before they didn't used to have a module which is called ESP. I mean, at the English department, where all they know about ESP is that it is English for specific purposes, full stop. And usually, what they know about ESP, I'm going to say it here in Arabic, they think that teaching ESP in different departments is purely the teaching of technical vocabulary related to the field of specialization. So they think that ESP has to do with teaching of mustalahat. Sorry to say it in Arabic. Mustalahat, we mean here vocabulary, or words related to the student's field of specialism. And here is the misconception. ESP has never been the teaching of technical vocabulary related to the student's field of specialism. So what is ESP? We are going to discuss it. Now, when we intend to teach ESP, we are supposed to teach skills. Here, I said skills in general. I didn't say neither reading nor speaking or writing, whatever. Why? Because the teaching of skills is based on the needs of our learners. So I cannot say that ESP is the teaching of the 4 skills. Of course, we need to teach all the 4 skills, but of course, more focus and attention is based on one skill according to the needs of our learners. ESP is also the teaching of a grammar through a context. ESP is also the teaching of vocabulary, but which type of vocabulary we should teach? This is what we are going to discuss. These are 3 points. So first of all, let's start with grammar teaching. So the majority, they think that ESP teaching, when we talk about grammar, I'm going to talk about 2 issues. What they think and what should be. There are many misconceptions about the role of grammar in ESP teaching. Indeed, it's often said that ESP teaching is not concerned with grammar skills because, as I have already explained, they think that ESP is purely the teaching of technical vocabulary related to the student's field, which is a misconception. Here we will talk about it later in practice. So we stated that the majority think that they have some misconceptions about the role of grammar in ESP teaching. It's often said that ESP teaching is not concerned with grammar, while much of the skills-oriented work in ESP doesn't concentrate on grammar itself. It's incorrect to consider grammar teaching as outside of the remit. Grammar is taught as being a part of whole texts. It's within readings, discussions, and lectures rather than separate from them. Therefore, grammar is not a separate entity which students need to memorize knowledge of, but rather needs to be viewed within the context of language use. I have liked it so much, this definition of grammar in ESP, when they have said that grammar shouldn't be put outside of the remit. Means that don't say that ESP shouldn't have to do with the grammar. ESP has to do with the grammar, but how it should be taught. ESP should be, or learners should be taught grammar within a context. Don't teach them grammatical items in isolation. Don't provide them with rules. I mean, say that, well, good morning. Well, today we are going to have the present simple. The present simple structure is subject plus verb, except he, she, it, plus verb plus s. Then I work, you work, he works, she works, it works, we work, and they work. Well, this is not the grammar how it should be taught in ESP. Even in general English now, we teach grammar through a context. What about ESP? Students should see the present simple functioning in a real context. Means bring a text from the field, a material from a field, a video from a field, whatever you use as a material, and make the students see how such a present simple is functioning in a real context. Okay, means that you should bring a text in which the present simple is well exemplified and teach it to their learners. They should see it, playing it, or function it in a real context. Okay, now which grammatical items are to be taught in ESP? Now we say, okay, I'm supposed to teach grammar. What grammatical elements are supposed to be included in ESP teaching? Well, here it's the field, it's the discipline, it's the students' needs that decides. Now, first, forget about students' needs. Here, we will discuss them later on. When we talk about the needs of our learners, when we talk about the needs of our learners, it's based on their needs that we decide what to teach in terms of skills or in terms of grammar or whatsoever. But I'm going to say also that the discipline may decide about the grammatical items to be included or to be taught. I'll give you an example. I am teaching English for computing science students. Which grammatical items I should teach? Present simple, passive voice, nominalization, etc. Why? Or let's continue. Another example. I am teaching English for journalism. Which grammatical items are supposed to be taught? Of course, the direct and indirect speeches, for instance. So the direct and the indirect speech. So here, I'd like to let you know that also the field or the discipline can decide about the grammatical items that should be taught. Another example, why or when we talk about computing, I say we need to teach, for instance, present simple, because when we talk about science, biology, computing sciences, etc., which tense that is usually occurring. Of course, we cannot teach them all the grammatical items. We teach the present simple because it's the tense that expresses facts. We teach the passive. Why the passive voice is important in scientific fields? Because we attempt not to use the person pronouns I. Instead, to avoid using the involvement of the researcher, we use the passive voice instead, especially when we talk about experiments or whatsoever. So again, I say that the discipline may decide about the type of grammar or the grammatical elements to be incorporated within the syllabus that is supposed to be taught. So we have also logical connectors. We need to teach them. Moreover, however, the sequencers, etc. So it is beneficial for them, maybe for future writing articles or whatever, something scientific. Primo-defined participle. Primo-defined participle, what do we mean by primo-defined participle? We should teach them like a given element, a given reaction, to use such a primo-defined participles, logical connectors, nominalization in order to avoid repetition. Instead of using the verb organize, we say organization, etc. So we have to teach them also nominalization. Now let's move on. I'm just doing briefly because I am more into the practical part. Concerning models, also we should teach them how to use the model may, might, can, could. Why? Because sometimes we should express a degree of certainty. We are not 100% sure. Okay, so we should also teach them models are also important to be incorporated in addition to word formation, etc. Now let's move on to vocabulary in ESP. Vocabulary, as I have already stated, that there is a misconception about ESP teaching. The majority believes the majority believes that ESP teaching has to do with the teaching of technical vocabulary. It's a misconception. Who is supposed to teach ESP? Is the EFL teacher? Well, the EFL teacher is required to teach another type of vocabulary, which is not the technical one. So we have to differentiate between two types of vocabulary in ESP. There is the technical vocabulary and the semi-technical vocabulary. Technical vocabulary can be synonymous to what we call jargon. What do we mean by jargon? Jargon are words or expressions that are related to the student's field of specialism and are partially understood by outsiders. Means if you do not belong to that specific domain or field, you may not understand those words related to that particular field or domain. And there is the semi-technical vocabulary. Semi-technical vocabulary, they are called semi-technical, core vocabulary, or sub-technical. Semi-technical, sub, or core vocabulary. Why core vocabulary? Because the ESP teacher is supposed to teach the semi-technical vocabulary. In other words, instead of teaching, the technical vocabulary, why we do not intend to teach it? Because the learners they know better in the field. Sometimes for computer science students, what I have observed when I told them, I've observed that they know the technical, they already say it naturally, the technical words in English, they already know them because what they study in their field of specialism, in their subject, in the content of their subject, they teach them words, the technical words already in English. Maybe what we observe that they mispronounce such words. So I correct only pronunciation, but I do not teach technical vocabulary. I do not provide learners with list of vocabulary to be memorized. This is a wrong way of teaching ESP. ESP is the teaching of the different skills, is the teaching of a grammar, is the teaching of the semi-technical vocabulary, and they should all be realized through a context or through the student's field of specialism. Okay, now, so we have talked about vocabulary. We have stated that there are two main types of vocabulary. I'm going to provide you with definitions that you may need. So technical vocabulary or jargon is a vocabulary used by special group or occupational class, usually only partially understood by outsiders. The special vocabularies of architecture, medicine, law, science, and technology all fall under the term or the heading of jargon. So the term jargon is applied chiefly to the words and phrases that are used and understood by people within a specific profession or field of study, but not others. So when we talk about technical vocabulary, it's only understood by people who belong to the same field of specialism or field or domain, and are partially understood by outsiders, only for those who may make researches. So examples of occupational jargon include such formal technical expressions as periorbital hematoma. When I say periorbital hematoma, this word may not be understood by everyone. It can be only understood by those who belong to the same field of specialism. What do we mean by such an expression? It refers to the black eye or to the lay person in medicine, and when we say the word escrow and discount rate in finance. So the jargon or the technical vocabulary is the words or expressions that is related to the student's field or domain of specialism, which can only understood by people who belong to the same field of interest and not others. The second type of vocabulary, which is the semi-technical vocabulary, and which should be taught by the ESP, which is supposed to be taught by the ESP teacher, is something else. Now, what is the semi-technical vocabulary? Semi-technical vocabulary covers a whole range of items which are neither highly technical and specific to a certain field of knowledge, nor obviously general in the sense of being everyday words which are not used in distinctive way in specialized texts. So the semi-technical vocabulary is meant to be neither highly technical nor too general. It's in between. It's already called semi-technical vocabulary, sub-technical. I've said that we should teach learners to use words like occur instead of happen. Happen is usual. I mean, it's a common word that may be used in everyday language. You should also teach them words like approximate, etc., instead of teaching them the highly technical. Now, you say, what about the technical vocabulary? I have observed that the majority of teachers provide learners with lists, huge lists of technical vocabulary, and ask them to memorize them, which shouldn't be the case of ESP. Here, where the EFL teacher should intervene, it's only when we feel that the learners need help in such areas. For instance, when I find them mispronouncing a word, when we find them that they do not know how to check the meaning of a particular word in a dictionary, here the teacher may intervene. But as technical vocabulary, it is not the role of the ESP teacher to teach the technical vocabulary, but he should rather focus on the teaching of the semi-technical words, so the semi-technical vocabulary instead. So briefly, again, I'm saying that it's briefly, I'm going through all these points. Now I'm going to talk about the types of content in ESP. And we have two main types. We have we have the real content and the career content. Well, I'm going to define them according to the scholars, then I'll give my own explanation. Well, types of content in ESP, we have stated that there are two main types of content. We have career content. It comes from the word to carry. And we have the real content. What is a career content? As defined in the book of Dudley Evans and S.T. John, refers to the subject matter of an exercise. It is in contrast with real content, which is the language skill or content of an exercise. This is career content. So I repeat, career content refers to the subject matter, means the domain. Subject matter is the field of specialism, the domain, the specialty of a particular group of learners or of an exercise. It is in contrast, means it's in opposition, in contrast with the real content. Now, what is meant by real content in this case? The real content is the linguistic content, progressive tense usage pattern, for example, which is present in the text. Dudley Evans and S.C. John differentiating between real content and career content. They stated in ESP, any teaching activity, whether its aim is to teach language or skills, is presented in a context. So according to Dudley Evans and S.C. John, any teaching activity, any skill, any grammatical point, any vocabulary should be presented in a context. This is the definition of Dudley Evans and S.C. John here in the real content and career content. Now, this is purely technical definition. I'm going to define it in my own terms so that I clarify the points. So we have two types of contents. We have career content and real content. Career content, it comes from the verb to carry, to hold something, okay? Career. And we have the real content. Now, let's start by the career content. We have said the career content comes from the word to carry something. What is to carry? What do we mean by career content? By career content, we can have it a synonym for career content, context, a text, a material that is used to teach something. The career content is only used as a means, as a vehicle to teach something else. All right? Please try to concentrate with me. I said that it's only used as a means, as a vehicle. Career content, we have nothing to do with it. Again, I give you the example of Java. I bring a text that has to do with the student's field of specialism. Please don't bring any text or any material that is related to the student field. You need to collaborate with the specialists in the field. You need to contact them. You need to check them. Why? Because if you teach students something too easy or something that they have already dealt with in your first year, you are teaching master students and you teach them, you bring a text that they have dealt with in their first year BA, okay, in licence. So the students may feel bored because they have already gone through such thing and they already have information and they may find it boring. Try to contact the specialists and ask them what they are teaching them currently. The students will feel much more motivated. And this is the objective of teaching ESP, is to motivate the learners, because it's, again, learner-centered approach. We need their involvement. We need their participation. We need to see them, present in the classroom. Here, the teacher is playing the role of the guide. So we said we go back to the career content. Career content, I say that it is a text. It can be a video, whatever material that is related to the student's field of specialism. Again, I brought a text that has to do with students' field of specialism, which is Java, for instance. Or if we talk about the field of medicine, I may bring them the text about the pandemic COVID-19. okay, because it's the present or the actual issue that we are dealing with. Or we can bring them a text that has to do with high blood pressure or whatever. So this is the career content, is a text, a material that is related to the student's field of specialism or domain. Now, we have a real content. What is a real content? Real content is the linguistic, they define it as the linguistic content. What do you mean by the linguistic content? Means that it's the real point that I intend to teach. Well, I am, again, an EFL teacher, an ESP practitioner. I want to teach the present simple. I should bring a career content, or the text or the material should contain, or the particular point that I intend to teach should be well exemplified in the career content. Okay? Career content, the selection of the material. Here, when I say that teaching ESP is easier than EGP, but not easy in itself, means it's easy to bring a text related to the student's field. But in order to set tasks, activities, to teach a particular point, here the task is difficult. Why? Because the selection, when I intend to teach the real content it means what I really intend to teach. I intend to teach the passive voice, or I intend to teach the particular grammatical point. Well, here, I'm sorry, here I should find the text in which the particular grammatical point is well exemplified. Means that I shouldn't bring a text in which there is only one tense in the present simple, and I say, well, check or have a look. The present simple is functioning in an authentic context. It's not the case. I should bring a text or a material in which the real content or the linguistic point that I intend to teach is well exemplified. Okay, the passive voice, the same thing. I should bring a text in which the passive voice is well exemplified in that text or material. In a very simple word, I'm going to explain to you the difference between career content and real content. Again, career content, I have stated that it is the context, the material that we use in order to teach the real content. The real content can be a particular linguistic item, linguistic point, or a skill that I intend to teach through that context. I'm going to explain in other words. The career content, you know, a baby or child, when you intend to give him a medicament, he refuses. As soon as you say, oh, well, you need to drink it because you are sick. So he says, no, I don't want it. But if you bring juice, for instance, and then you inject the medicament that you intend to give, he's going to feel happy, motivated to drink the juice. But inside, you have injected what you intended to give him. It's exactly the case. The juice is the career content. As soon as the learners are going to see material related to their field of specialism, they are going to feel motivated. Say, well, I have something to do. I have something to say in this topic, in whatever language, in English, in French, or in Arabic. But he feels motivated to get involved in the course. But your intention as a language teacher is not to teach the career content, but to teach the real content, which is a particular skill or language point. Okay? So the role of the real content is just to carry the real content, The role of the career content is to teach the real content. So the career content thus carries the real content, and while the students learn the career content, the focus of the language teacher is on the real content. The aim of the career content is to motivate the students to learn the real content, which can be a particular grammar point, vocabulary, skill, or whatever, as this career content would make the learning process faster, motivated, and easier. Well, that's all for the difference between the real content and career content. Now, I'm going to discuss briefly before we move on to the practical part or to our case study. I'm going to discuss briefly with you the different roles of the ESP teacher. Of course, when we teach ESP in the English department, here we are called, I guess, ESP teachers or teachers in charge of the ESP module, or we are simply teaching the didactics of teaching ESP. But when we are sent to a particular department of computing, of biology, of journalism, whatever, here we are supposed to be called ESP practitioners. Okay, an ESP practitioner. What do you mean by an ESP practitioner? Means that the ESP practitioner is supposed to put into practice all the theories or the required parameters into or the prerequisites of ESP teaching into application. Otherwise, he is not an ESP practitioner, he is just an EGP teacher. Now, what are the different roles of the ESP teacher? Dudley Evans and St. John 1998 discussed 5 main roles of the ESP teacher. He is a teacher, like the general English teacher. He is a course designer and material provider. He is a researcher. He is a collaborator, and he is an evaluator. So they have discussed 5 main issues for the ESP teacher. I repeat, he plays all the different roles of the EGP teacher. So he is a teacher. He is a course designer and material provider, means that the teacher is supposed to design his own courses based on the students' needs. He is a material provider, meaning that he is supposed to bring a material that suits, the materials that suit, that fit the learner's needs. He is also a course design material provider, a researcher. What do you mean by a researcher? Means that the teacher should conduct some research in the field of interest of learners. Of course, the teacher is a learner in the ESP classroom. He learns from his learners. He collaborates with his learners in order to learn more about ESP, but he also should conduct some research, because they should the students should make him feel at least that he is interested, that he has some knowledge in the field he is teaching. Okay, he shouldn't be a specialist, but he should have some knowledge in the field of specialism he is teaching. This is what we make what we mean by the ESP teacher as a researcher. He is a collaborator. Collaborate with whom? He's supposed to collaborate either with his learners or with the specialists in the field. His learners, because again, they are the primary knowers of the subject matter, they know more about the specialty than the EFL teacher. And of course, the EFL teacher knows more about the language. And also the ESP teacher may collaborate with his colleagues of the subject content. How he collaborates, he may ask them about the topics that the students are interested in, or about the program they are teaching, so that he knows about the topics and may use them as a career content in order to teach a particular language point. Okay, so this is his role as a collaborator, either with learners or with a specialist in the field. Now, evaluator. What do we mean by evaluator? The ESP teacher or the ESP practitioner is required to evaluate his course. At the end of each course, we need to make an evaluation to know about the extent of feasibility, of success of the course, whether it has met the needs of the learners, whether it has satisfied or catered the needs of our learners, because again, in ESP, what we intend to do is to satisfy the needs of our learners. Okay, So this is briefly about ESP in theory, the didactics of teaching ESP. Of course, there are so many points to be discussed, like needs analysis, the importance of needs analysis, how we conduct needs analysis, etc. But I prefer to devote one more course only for needs analysis, the different types of needs analysis, models of needs analysis, etc., for another training course. But what we should bear in mind that needs analysis, that needs analysis is the focal point before any ESP teaching, where according to the center, it remains only 10 minutes. 10 minutes is left, but I guess I need more. Yet I feel thirsty, but I need more than 10 minutes. Now we move on. I prefer to move on to the practical part, or because in my title, as you can see, I have written ESP teaching between theory and practice. Okay. So ESP teaching in theory and the practice. So now we move on to the practical part. I'm going to share my screen with you. Well, I have conducted a case study in the Department of Computing, Computing Science. So this is my case study. I hope that it's clear. Okay. All right, please, can you see it?
It's okay, it's good, thank you.
Thank you. So the case of computer science students. Well, what is the case of computer science students? Well, I'm going to explain to you what I did. So as we have already defined, ESP is a good option for students of different fields of study, since it equips them with the necessary information of their concerned subject, as well as linguistic competence. ESP promotes learners' motivation because it closely addresses their English language needs, and this can help teachers identify the actual skills that their learners will need for the activities they have to carry out in their academic or professional fields. However, ESP teaching materials and the courses delivered in Algerian universities do not fully cater to the needs of the students because they have just been managed from different sources, regardless of students' level and aim of learning. Means that they do not take into account the purpose of learning. Moreover, ESP teaching at university level has been confined to the teaching of sentence structures and memorization of professional vocabularies related to the student's subject field. As I have already stated, what they do when teachers are sent to different departments, they either provide learners with sentences in isolation about the grammatical points, or they provide them with lists of vocabulary to be memorized. And this, of course, can make students feel stressed since they do not use them in an authentic context, and it often decreases their English learning motivation. Besides, ESP teaching demands well-trained ESP teachers, but research has reported that the number of ESP practitioners is much below the required strength in different countries, which is the main reason behind ineffective ESP teaching. And of course, Algeria doesn't constitute an exception. We do not have well-trained ESP teachers. Furthermore, despite the importance of ESP courses, especially at the Department of Computing, there has been absolutely no formal survey of the needs and expectations of computer science students in using English for specific purposes courses at Media University. Means that the teachers do not ask their learners about their needs. I'm sorry. Okay. Now, what were our research objectives? The main concern of the study was to evaluate the current or the actual ESP courses at the Department of Computing in the light of the students' needs, analyze and propose a procedure that would make the ESP course more efficient, and then we have attempted to put into application the suggested procedure and evaluate its efficiency. Well, for the research questions, they were as follows. To what extent is the current ESP course appropriate and effective in meeting students' needs? What would be the most appropriate procedure that should be implemented before designing an ESP course? And what would be the most suitable means to implement the suggested procedure? The research hypothesis that has been proposed are as follows. We advance that the ESP course, which is currently taught to first semester students of computing, doesn't match the standard criteria and requirement of ESP course design. In other words, means what we learn in theory is not put into application in the actual delivered ESP courses. We hypothesize that a specially conceived procedure for the ESP course would probably improve its efficient implementation. And we presuppose that once learners' specific needs are identified and the appropriate means are made available, that relevant teaching materials can be used to teach the course more effectively. Our research methodology, this study has adopted the mixed method research design. The procedure, the data collected was analyzed qualitatively and quantitatively and interpreted through descriptive statistics. The tools that has been used are documentation analysis, interviews, and questionnaires. Let's move on now to the field work and interpretation of the data. Well, in this part, we provided a general overview of the current situation of ESP courses at the university or in Algerian universities in general. So we have attempted to analyze the current delivered ESP courses, analyze interviews and questionnaires of both respondents, and then finally we have attempted to put the course into application, then evaluate the extent of its feasibility and efficiency. Well, our major findings, first about the general overview of the ESP course of the Computing Science Department. For the teachers, what we have observed, that the majority that a BA in English or licence is enough to be accepted to teach in this department. Means they do not require any MA or PhD holder, any BA holder, okay, just come and fill in the gap, okay? The teachers are not under any kind of supervision. There is total absence of specialized institutions devoted to the training of teachers of foreign language at university level, and each teacher relies on his own experience, if any, because majority are not experienced, are just novice teachers. Now, concerning the learners, we have observed that they focus only on marks. They have a module of English. Second, they do not really give it importance. They want just to have marks and they are demotivated. They feel bored. For the program, no program is provided and each teacher relies on his own methodology and his own experience to teach the course. So what did we do? We have attempted then to analyze the documents in hand. I have attempted to collect the different lectures that are being taught to those learners. And I have observed the following, that more focus is given to the teaching of technical vocabulary and mostly in isolation. As I have already stated, they provide learners with a list of vocabulary to be memorized. The grammar taught is very general and not purposeful, meaning that they do not take into consideration the grammatical items that are required and that are needed by the learners and even by the field of specialism. The courses are grammar centered. They only teach grammar. They do not teach any other skills or whatever. Examples and activities are taken from everyday life. Well, when we have interviewed the teachers, we have observed that almost all the interviewed ESP teachers indicated that they had no training for teaching the ESP course. The ESP teachers tend not to see much procedural differences between EGP and ESP. They consider it to be one when it comes to methodology. The ESP teachers tend to use their own methods derived from intuitions and experience rather than theory and principles, means they know absolutely nothing about the didactics of teaching ESP. So the majority of the English language teachers at the department, as you can see, are BA holders. No provision have been made for ESP training. The language teachers at the computer science department have been simultaneously teachers, maybe course designers, and probably material providers, but they have never been collaborator, nor researchers, nor evaluators. And this we have already explained them, that the teacher, the ESP practitioner, in order to call it as such, required to play the 5 roles: teacher, course design, material provider, researcher, collaborator, and even evaluator. The focus on teaching technical vocabulary and the explanation of grammar dominated the ESP classes, and the fundamental procedure, the core of ESP teaching, of needs assessment or needs analysis, has been neglected. When we have conducted such questionnaire, they stated that they do not use needs analysis before the design of their ESP courses. Now, students' interview analysis. Now, we want to know about students' impressions, students' satisfaction about the actual delivered ESP course. So the majority of the students didn't appear to be satisfied with their achievement in English. Students have been viewed teaching to be mainly teacher-centered instead of learner-centered. The students didn't reveal much satisfaction with the materials in use. They believe that many of the texts they studied were irrelevant, and they have absolutely nothing to do with their subject specialism. So what did we do in this case? Of course, we shouldn't only criticize. We have described the current situation, the actual situation of teaching ESP. Then we need to suggest solutions. We need to put into practice what we learned in theory, about ESP. So the core of ESP is needs analysis. The first point that we have done is conducting a needs analysis questionnaire. We wanted to improve the teaching of ESP. We wanted to apply the basic principles of ESP teaching. So we have conducted needs analysis. We have looked into the needs of our learners. We have talked about their levels, whether it's high, intermediate, or low. It has been observed that the majority have intermediate level in English. We have attempted also to check the attitude of learners towards the importance of English. They considered very important, yet they haven't felt satisfied about the actual delivered ESP course. Their competency, we have also asked them about their competency in English language skills, and we have asked about the skills they need more training. Of course, when we talk about skills, we have asked about the skill they need more training in, or the skill that requires more focus, which one requires a lot of training and little training. And of course, each skill, for instance, speaking skill, writing, reading or writing has been, or listening, reading, they have been divided into sub-skills. When we talk about speaking, we have participating in class discussion, speaking fluently, expressing ideas and opinions, giving our presentations. So we have asked our learners about which skill and even sub-skill they require training in. And this is how we have to start in order to design a course. Based on the statistics, based on the learner's needs, we have to design, or the course should be designed accordingly. We have also looked into the favorable teaching style that the learner prefer, whether audiovisual or hand materials, or giving presentations and making projects, or is it group discussions. So we have taken that into account because, again, we are talking about ESP, we are talking about a learner-centered teaching methodology or teaching approach. After that, we have attempted to design a course that is based on the statistics or the needs of our learners. Of course, when we talk about the course design, the course content and type of activities, the structure of the course, the newly designed course was based on topics found useful for computer science students. When selecting the proper topics, existing ESP textbooks for the given content were consulted, means that we have attempted to consult some textbooks related to the computing science field. Several communication functions which were considered beneficial for the students were also added, and relevant grammatical structures which might be necessary for learners of computing science were also included in the newly designed course. Now I'm going to show you a sample course that has been designed. This course because the students wanted to improve their speaking skill. So I've asked them in small groups, study and discuss the illustration below, then prepare a description and give an oral report to the class. Of course, this is how we should teach ESP, through a career content. This is supposed to be a career content, and the real content is to make a report, an oral report or presentation. Here it is another sample of a course here in order to develop the writing skill, as you can see. And then, as I have already stated, whenever we design a course, I'm sorry because we are restricted by time, I have attempted to show you just 2 courses, newly designed courses. Now, whenever we design a course, we need to know about its efficiency, its feasibility, in accordance with the learner's needs. Of course, we have attempted to design an evaluation questionnaire in which we have asked our learners about their satisfaction, about the material provided in different skills, about the teacher way of teaching, about the methodology that has been adapted, and also about the course content, the grammatical items that have been taught. And as you can see, the students are cooperative with the teacher, efficient time that has been used. And as you can see in the statistic, the students have been highly satisfied about the newly designed ESP course, unlike the previous one, which has been already given. As a general conclusion, during the process of our research investigation, we reached the following conclusions. Number 1, adopting needs analysis can provide the necessary platform required for the delineations of the desired course. Needs analysis offers information on both the content and form that the course is expected to exhibit. Teaching and learning ESP courses that are matching with the students' need would certainly produce reasonable outcomes. Accurately prepared ESP courses encourage students to learn and search in their field of specialization, and ESP courses will be more effective if they are taught by well-trained instructors. So ESP teachers need some training in order to be called ESP practitioners. Now, as general recommendations that we have provided, ESP teachers should adapt learners' needs analysis as the essential basis for designing ESP courses to avoid having any problems or drawbacks that affect students' English learning. As I have already explained, needs analysis is the core, and ESP teachers are required to conduct needs analysis before the design of any ESP course that would focus on any skill or grammatical item or vocabulary. Selection of ESP course contents should be strictly decided, investigating learners' needs in order to prepare more motivating and effective lectures. And teachers have to work and collaborate with other colleagues at the department to compile a more practical syllabus. So collaboration is very important, either with the learners, if collaboration with subject specialists is not a possibility. The ESP instructors have to cooperate with the content department in order to increase their knowledge about the students' needs regarding their major subjects. And as English plays a crucial role, the criteria to define English language courses for computing science students should be based on both the target and present communicative situation, representing the communicative language needs rather than formal linguistic points or grammatical rules. I'm sorry, is there a problem?
It's okay, doctor. We are hearing you and we see the templates.
Okay, I guess I cannot move on to the last slides. I don't know what's wrong.
Just to return to the slide and click on the direction button.
doesn't work. Anyway, it doesn't matter.
Or just click on escape and then redo again the sharing in big screen, the full screen share.
All right. Okay. Yes. Is it clear right now?
It's good.
Thank you. So English language courses should contain materials for teaching students different study skills to motivate and help them search for further knowledge in their field of specialization using different resources. English language teachers should evaluate their courses to improve and promote their effectiveness. And finally, in-service training should be regarded both as an urgent need for the teachers and as a necessity to improve the course. Implementation of suitable and relevant teacher training leads to the success and accomplishment of an ESP course programs. Teachers will be interested in teaching ESP courses if they are, if they carry or if they are well trained on the purpose and most effective procedures for the teaching the ESP course. At the end, I'd like to thank you for your kind attention. Thank you very much.
Thank you, doctor, for the effort you have done. Thank you again. I'm not a specialist in the English language, but I remember some sentences for using specific words, vocabulary, for writing research, and for other matter of writing also. I think that many followers wanna ask questions. Please raise your hand if you wanna ask any question. I think most questions are about writing articles and techniques to be clear and to start writing, since PhD students are obliged to have at least 2 articles in their courses. So can you give us some tricks about this?
Well, we cannot only talk about articles. Here, when we talk about ESP teaching in general, here it differs from one field to another. If we talk about, for instance, because the needs differs according to the field of specialism. For instance, if we talk about students of computing, yes, the majority are asking about how to write articles. Of course, here, in order to improve their writing skill, here we should teach them the points that would help them write. For instance, the present simple, the passive voice, how to implement them, how they use nominalization, how they use logical connectors, etc. So we are not going to teach them how to write a piece of writing, but because they already have, I have said, in ESP, they should already have a general background in general English. So we should teach them items like this, like how to make cohesion and coherence, how to use logical connectors, which tense should be used in order to express facts. They shouldn't use, for instance, too long sentences, because the reader may not understand. So we should provide them with such pieces of advice. And here, when we talk about articles, but again, it needs analysis that determines, that decides what should be taught. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm trying to check in the Facebook page about questions. There is someone who wanna ask Miss Fouzia Rouar, please activate your microphone. Mrs. Fouzia, please, we are waiting for you.
She's a colleague of mine. I'm very pleased to hear from her.
Hello?
Hello. Hello, doctor.
Hello. Can you hear me, Ouafa?
Yes, I do.
Thank you. I'd like to congratulate you for your outstanding presentation. And I'm really proud of you for your hard work and commitment. Yeah, I've got just a question, actually many questions, but something actually attracted my attention concerning the role of the ESP practitioner.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned that the teacher or the EFL teacher could collaborate with student and teacher, isn't it? I mean, colleagues who teach subject matter, isn't it?
Would you please repeat the last word? I haven't heard it.
You said that the teacher, the EFL teacher, is one of his roles is to collaborate.
Yes.
Yeah, and you mentioned with the student and with his or her colleagues who teach subject matter. Yeah. So something that I couldn't grasp is how EFL teacher could collaborate with the students, especially who are more knowledgeable than him, and the student who may instruct him. And you know whether that in ESP context, the main difference is only under ESP that our learners may instruct us, especially if they are knower of information.
Okay. Well,
how could we collaborate with them if they know better than us or know more, or they know more than us?
That's it. This is the point, Dr. Fouzia. This is the point that I'd like to mention, is that I know they are the primary knowers of their subject matter. Therefore, the teacher should make them feel that they are important, that they are doing something. He should feel interested when they explain something, they give him more details. Here, it doesn't make the teacher feel weak. Instead, here, when we talk about general English, sometimes the teacher is not well prepared, because we say a good preparation makes a good teacher. But in ESP, it's absolutely the contrary. The EFL teacher should provide a low profile. The learner, of course, he should show that he masters the language, the English language, but who is supposed to, he should show that he is interested in his learners. And it means that he is learning from them. He should show them that, well, does it function like this? Well, I don't know. It's a way of making them speak and involved. Okay, it motivates them. So since they are the primary knowers, he collaborates with them when it comes to the subject matter. But when it comes to the language, because as I have already explained, that the teacher is supposed to teach the real content, so he should focus more on reaching this objective and not on teaching the career content. He should make the learners play this role of they are teaching about Java or whatever topic related to a particular field. But his real role is to teach the language and not the specialty. The special, because another role, Fouzia, another role is a researcher. The teacher shouldn't show that he knows absolutely nothing about the field. He should make some researches in the field that he is interested to. I am an EFL teacher. I'm not supposed to know about biology, journalism, computing, etc. And I am sent to different departments to teach such topics. But I have to make some researches in the field, and I complete my learning with my learners. Now, they say, when we collaborate with the learners, when collaboration with colleagues or teamwork is not a possibility, because sometimes you cannot really collaborate with specialists because of different schedules or timetables or whatever, but it's better to consult them. How to collaborate with them is to check, for instance, the text, the material that they are actually teaching for their learners. As I have already stated, for instance, if you provide learners with topics that they have already known, or they feel boring, it's too easy, or they are too familiar, they may feel bored also, though it is related to their field of specialism. You see?
Thank you. Thank you, Ouafa. So just the last question. Do you agree with me that...
Okay, go ahead. Yeah, instead, I really feel motivated with you to discuss such issues. Go ahead.
So do you agree with me that we could name, I mean, the EFL teacher as consultant when our students are better as far as the subject matter is concerned?
Yeah. He is a consultant because look, Fuzia, his role is not to teach the career content. The career content is just used as a means, as a vehicle. As I have given the example of the child, we are injecting something else through this career content. My purpose is not to teach him the career content. He has already learned this in his field. It's just a means, a vehicle to motivate him, to make him an active participant in the teaching learning process. That's it. This is the role of the career content. And you should, again, you should make a low profile, as I have explained. You said, really? Please give me more details about this. I'm really interested. I want to learn about the field of computing. So you make them involved, you make them speak, etc. And they also feel confident because they know better. Of course, they know that you are not specialist and they learn from you the language. Fuzia, I have another question. I'm going to ask you not a question, but I'm going to answer it. But I'm going to ask you a question, which is a controversial matter. Who is supposed to teach ESP? The specialist or the EFL teacher? Imagine, I am...
Both. Okay, well, in the ideal situation actually is the one who is good at the subject matter or who learns the subject matter in English is the best ESP practitioner. I mean, a medical doctor who studied medicine in English, or an architect who studied architecture in English, or engineer who studied engineering in English. Actually, the ideal ESP practitioner is the one who learns the subject matter. Of course, who learns the subject matter in the target language. However, the EFL teacher is also a good teacher if he's good at pedagogy and didactics, but at the same time, he should have a good background knowledge in the subject matter. Actually, I cannot teach medical.
It's a controversial. Okay, Dr. Fuzia, it's a controversial matter, but I have my own experience and I have read an article about this and we are going to discuss. You know, you really make me motivated even more to discuss such issues with you. So first, I'm going to mention something, then I go back to the EFL practitioner and the specialist. I'm going to talk about, I've recalled the quotation of Scrivener in 2003. He stated, they know about the topic. When he said they know, he means the learners. They know about the topic. You know about English, means the EFL teacher. They know about the topic. They know about the topic. You know about English. Put them together and you will have an exciting lesson.
Yeah,
they know about the topic. They know about the topic. You know about English. Put them together, and you'll have an exciting session or lesson. What does it mean? It means that such a collaboration is very effective. They know about the topic, but as you have stated, the EFL teacher should make some research. One of the main roles is a researcher. Collaborate and evaluate. You should also evaluate the course. Now, who is better qualified to teach ESP? Is he the specialist teacher who masters English plus the specialty, or the EFL teacher? Again, it's a controversial matter. Some state that the EFL teacher is better qualified, and others stated that it's the specialist who is better qualified to teach such a course. But personally speaking, I would say that the EFL teacher is better qualified. Not question of qualifications, because it's based on personal experience. When I used to be student, one of my colleagues used to be a professor in metallurgy. So he used to study English with us, and he's teaching English for his field of specialism. I'm going to give you this experience, and I have already read an article in which they stated that the EFL teacher is better qualified. Why? Sometimes he told me that sometimes I forget about teaching English and I go into teaching the specialty. You see? So it can, mastering the specialty may be a disadvantage in some cases, you see. You know, I am a researcher in the field. I should conduct some research as an EFL teacher. But when I teach, I focus more on teaching the language, the real content, the linguistic items. Okay, but I am a specialist. Sometimes I have a tendency to teach more and to provide more knowledge about the specialty rather than the language, even if I master both. You see, Fuzia? And it was stated by that professor. He said that sometimes I find myself teaching the specialty rather than teaching the language, but the EFL teacher is limited.
Yeah, that's true.
You see?
That's
I hope that I have convinced you.
Sure.
It's still a controversial matter. Some, they believe that the one who masters better the specialties plus the language, it's a plus. Of course, it's a plus. But again, the language teacher, the learners they need really the language more than the field or the specialty.
Of course, pedagogy and didactics are very important in teaching the subject matter, either for general English or for specific English, actually.
Yeah, that's it.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yet, thank you. You're mostly welcome. Yet, and I'm very happy and pleased to see you among the the participants or the attendees. I would like to discuss something else. I have just forgotten about the idea that I'd like to.
I have another question for you, if you want.
Yes,
there's someone. Yeah, there's someone in Facebook Live.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, who said teaching a class consists of 2,200 students with different specialization. How could an ICP teacher prepare a material that meets their needs? Speaking skill, or of course, is not to be considered.
Would you please repeat for me? Would you please reread for me?
Teaching a class of 200 students with different specialization. How could an ICP teacher prepare a material that meets their needs?
A good question. Yes, it's a good question. I'm going to tell you something. Well, here it differs from EAP and EOP situation. When he's talking about an EAP situation, which I have personally faced when I taught at the Department of Computing. Sometimes you teach, they give you, for example, student 2,000 students or 100, etc. Of course, you cannot ask about all their needs, but when it comes to EAP, it's much more easier. Why? EAP in EAP situation or English for academic purposes, here you may, the first thing that we should do is to conduct needs analysis. So we can analyze the needs of our learners. Of course, we cannot satisfy all their needs, all right, but we can devote each session to something so that we can satisfy the majority. All right, here in an EAP situation. However, in an EOP situation, when it comes to English for occupational purposes, here we should divide them into needs and fields of specialism. But in EAP, as he has stated, you cannot really satisfy. But I'm going to limit when I ask some questions about speaking, writing, etc. I'm not going to give it open as I did. When we provide the speaking skill, you provide the sub skills that the learners need more training in. Okay, and as I've said, you cannot satisfy all the needs 100%, but the majority will be satisfied because you will attempt to have a variety of courses, one of grammar, one of vocabulary, one of skills, but more attention will be devoted to a particular skill. And we have to analyze the needs of our learners. We have to always go back to the needs of our learners, and we have to make a continuous evaluation. In ESP, instead of using the word continuous, I'm going to use an ongoing evaluation. Mean after each course, you ask the learners about their satisfaction and you can improve on the coming lecture or course. Thank you.
Well, thank you for this answer. Maybe it's interesting to know that, and maybe the follower will get this answer and get a better understanding of how he will deal with this matter. I think
very enthusiastic and motivated to discuss more questions, because I'm keen on ESP and I really like to discuss different issues about the didactics of teaching ESP.
Yeah,
because
that's
unfortunately,
yeah, that's why we are hoping in the center to have more workshops and more conferences, yeah, in which, yeah, you can explain more and more in specific topics related to ICP. I have a nice comment here. It's extremely vital workshop. The topic gains widespread popularity and remarkable credence. We look forward more interesting workshops concerning e-learning approaches to ICP.
Thank you very much for such a comment. It motivates me.
We worked hard tonight on this workshop. We are about 2 hours of real continuous work, a good presentation, good comments, big and marvelous sensations about the things the attendees learned. And I think we hope for more workshops, because I repeat it again, the doors are open to you, to other specialists, to bring their knowledge about many topics. المركز الديمقراطي العربي يفتح أبوابه للجميع، ويتمنى أن يكون ذلك حافز على أن يتقدم الخبراء وعلماؤنا العرب بتقديم أحسن المواد وأحسن الدورات التدريبية. فكما قلنا وأسلفنا، المركز هو مركز للجميع، كل الأساتذة والباحثين من كل الأقطار العربية بدون تفرقة وبصفة حيادية وموضوعية وشفافة. فالهدف الأول للمركز هو أن يتم نقل المعرفة وتوفيرها بالمجان لكل الباحثين. نتعب في ذلك، أنتم كذلك أستاذتي الفاضلة دكتورة وفاء أورنيقي. كنا مع هذه الدورة التدريبية الجيدة، وأشكرك باسم الأستاذ رئيس المركز الديمقراطي العربي الأستاذ عمار شرعان، الذي أبلغني تشكراته الحارة وأمانيه بأن نحافظ على أنفسنا في هذه الأجواء التي صرنا نسمع فيها مؤخرا بانتشار الوباء. لذلك فهو يلح على أن أبلغ الحضور الكريم سواء عبر الزوم أو الفيسبوك وأنفسنا أيضا بضرورة الغسل المستمر لليدين، الحفاظ على التباعد الجسدي، وأيضا الاحتراز من نقل العدوى. دكتورة وفاء أورنيقي، لكم الكلمة الأخيرة باللغة العربية والإنجليزية معا قبل أن نختتم هذه الدورة.
Okay, well, I am really very pleased to be among you and to present a course in ESP. I'd like also to thank the Democratic Arabic Center for all the efforts and for helping me, for being by my side in whatever proposition I make, whether a conference or training course. I'm really thankful, and I express my gratitude to all of you, starting from Mr. Sharan Ammar, the head of the Democratic Arabic Center. I'd like also to thank you, Mr. Aish, for all your efforts, for the efforts that you are making for the center in general and for me in particular. تحية طيبة للجميع وشكرا على المتابعة، وإن شاء الله نتمنى أن نقدم دورات أخرى. That's all. Thank you.
شكرا دكتورة. Thank you very much. We are very pleased to have you tonight in this workshop. برنامج المركز الديمقراطي العربي يستمر من خلال مؤتمر الجندر غدا السبت والأحد، ومحاضرة جديدة يوم الاثنين بعنوان القيادة التعليمية من إلقاء الدكتورة العابد الزهراء هي أستاذة محاضرة من المدرسة العليا للأساتذة بوهران الجزائر، ستكون المحاضرة من تقديم الدكتورة سعاد بسناسي، إلى أن نلتقي بطبيعة الحال في مختلف الأنشطة. لا أنسى أن أجدد دعواتي لكم بأن تبقوا في صحة جيدة بصحة وسلامة، وأن تحافظوا على أنفسكم ضد المتحورات وضد دلتا وأوميكرون، ولا ندري أي متحور جديد سيبرز مستقبلا. شكرا لكم جميعا وشكرا لكل الحضور. الشهادة ستوصلون بها قريبا، وليلة طيبة للجميع، وشكرا للدكتورة وفاء مجددا. ليلة طيبة.
شكرا جزيلا. شكرا. Thank you.